Well, they say the third time's a charm, but we're just going to keep on mocking, baby. That's right, my mock 3.0 is here. Mel Kiper Jr. and I are going to break down the top 10 picks of the 2025 NFL Draft. That's coming up. Plus, we're responding to your questions, your takes, and your draft dreams live as First Draft starts right now. Hello and welcome into First Draft. We're live twice a week, every Monday and Thursday. The best place to find us is either wherever you get your podcasts or the NFL on ESPN YouTube channel. He is Mel Kiper Jr. I am Field Yates. Mel, we're going to do two parts to my mock. It's going to be today, the top 10 picks. And then our next show will be kind of recapping some of the stuff that we did not get to. But be honest, Mel, did you wake up this morning and say to yourself, my life will never be the same because I just witnessed the greatest mock draft in the history of mock drafts that Field Yates dropped on Monday morning?
Well, if you think a C plus is great, Field, that would be okay. You know, the C plus all of a sudden for some people, hey, when I was in high school at Calvert Hall, a C plus would have been phenomenal. Okay, yeah, I'd have been really happy with a C plus. Okay, so it depends how we're viewed, nationally, globally. But I think the only thing that disappointed me, and the reason it wasn't an A, it was no trades, and I thought you would come through with a trade or two to really spice it up a little bit. But it ended up being a little bit boring for me because it didn't have a trade. And I thought you would, like I say, do something a little different, a little bit, outside the box. Because I'm one that says no trades, but maybe I'm going to have to be the guy that goes and does something a little crazy in my next mock that comes out at the end of February. So we'll see, Phil. But I really thought you would be a little bit more creative with this mock.
Man, that's a challenge right there. I don't know when my next mock comes out, but now all of a sudden I know that the stakes have been raised. If I don't get in there with some trades, I'm going to get another C plus. And there was a time in my life, like you, where I would have settled for a C plus, but not in the mock drafting business. All right. So again, what we're going to do today is the first 10 picks. Try to put some weight behind each of these selections because unlike last year, Mel, we got bored by like the second mock draft. It was Caleb, Jaden, Drake in some order, 1, 2, 3. This year, a little bit different. So without any further ado, allow us to enter the top 10 of the first round of the 2025 Mock Draft 3.0 presented by me.
So it is my pleasure to declare the mock draft officially open. The pick is in.
All right, Mel, the Tennessee Titans are officially on the clock. As we know, they secured that pick on the final Sunday of the NFL's regular season. And with the clock being here, it's time for everybody's favorite chime. All right, Mel, the pick is officially in, and with the first pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, I have the Tennessee Titans taking Travis Hunter, wide receiver and cornerback from Colorado. I'll just give a couple of brief thoughts, and then you can fill in some gaps on what you think here, Mel. You and I have both talked about Travis Hunter as the best, or at worst, the second best prospect in this year's draft class. The Titans have made it clear that they are not going to force the issue at quarterback, and at least my grades on both Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders would have them being pushed up the board significantly if they do go first or second overall for a team that is not willing to make that forced decision. I understand the Abdul Carter and the Travis Hunter debate. I just kind of landed back here on the versatility, Mel. I mean, how many players have a credible case? And we'll see what it ends up being in the NFL. But Travis Hunter has a credible case to be a Pro Bowl or even all-pro level player at two different positions. Think about how hard that is. And I'm not talking about a left tackle who kicks inside to left guard or a corner and a safety. I'm talking on both sides of the ball here, Mel. And on top of everything he brings to the table as a prospect, Travis Hunter is one of the highest character football players in the entire draft class as well. The sheer determination he showed to play as many snaps as he did this past season, Mel, makes me feel like if you're a first-time GM, like Mike Borgonzi is for the Titans, there are very few players who thread the needle of having both an extremely high ceiling and an extremely high floor. I landed on Travis Hunter for those reasons. Did I make the right call?
Well, I think you have to figure out quarterback, Field. And as you guys know, and everybody knows, I'm a Will Levis guy. I still hold out hope that Will Levis can be a quality starting quarterback in this league. I know you don't, and I know a lot of our viewers, listeners don't. I know a lot of Tennessee Titan fans don't, and a lot of them, the people that cover the NFL don't. And it's what you see. I understand what you saw last year was some mistakes and some inconsistency. and he was playing through a shoulder injury. But he had some great moments. I say great moments. He had some awful moments. We remember the Bears game, which was him just trying to make a play, flick it out. Stevenson picks it off, and and then the Jets game where he tried to get it to Spears. Guess what, Field? Had he gotten it to Spears, forget the Bears game, right? Had he gotten that ball to Spears, oh, yeah, no. Oh, how many times they say no. Oh, great, right? It was one of those, it just didn't work, and it turned it over. They ended up missing out on 3 points. That didn't kill them in that game. What killed him in that game was some drop passes and missed opportunities after Will Levis kind of righted the ship. And that was a game where Brian Callahan went crazy about that one mistake. And it seemed like from that point on, it was, he got into the mind of Will, then he got hurt, but he had a stretch where he only threw 2 interceptions and 7 touchdown passes. And his comment was after that last game, before he got basically had the disaster against the Bengals and bench, was, I played the cleanest game of my career, but yet Brian Callahan wasn't raving about it after the game. So Brian Callahan said, don't turn it over. But when you don't turn it over and play a clean game, that's not good enough either. So I think what happened was it gets into the mind of a young quarterback. Remember, it was his first year in this offense. First year with a lot of new pieces around him, and he had a right tackle, couldn't block anybody. That right tackle position was horrible. So you're behind the sticks. You got all these issues. You're playing with a shoulder injury. You got hit right before the end of the half in a game where you had to get shot up at halftime just to get back in the game. Yet we're gonna treat this quarterback like he's a 6-year veteran who's been in the same offense for 5 or 6 years. So I think that's unfair. To the point about the quarterback, I agree that you can't put all your hope and faith in Will Levis. He has not shown enough yet to do that. I get it. Okay, I wouldn't do it either. Would I bring somebody else in, like maybe Sam Darnold, somebody like that, or Daniel Jones, whoever it may be, somebody that can compete? Like J.J. McCarthy was supposed to be the guy in Minnesota, not Sam Darnold. J.J. got hurt, and Sam became the guy. Let Will Levis see if he can upgrade. Is that with Carson Palmer in California, working on some things pocket-wise? He's got to be able to use his legs more. I think he knows that, right? As he said, recalibrate. You think you got a system, but you got to recalibrate your competitiveness and all that. Bottom line is bring somebody else in Field or draft Cam Ward. Or Shedeur Sanders. I mean, that's their thing. If they love one of these 2 quarterbacks, Field, they got to take them. Okay, because even if Will develops into a heck of a quarterback, it's a win-win. You got Will developed and the other guy's there, and you can trade him. If Will doesn't, you got the other guy developing, right? Bottom line is they got to get another quarterback. Who that's going to be, I don't know, but there's going to be another quarterback in there with Will Levis. You know that. So if you don't take quarterback at one, take Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter. Then you got to go out and get one of those quarterbacks that's available. It's not drafting another quarterback. You're not going to do that. You're going to go get a quarterback via free agency or trade. Maybe Justin Fields. Maybe the Steelers don't. I like Justin Fields. I think the Steelers will ride forward with Justin Fields. We'll see. But some way, somehow, the Titans are going to get a quarterback in here to compete with Will Levis. And if they do take that generational talent, it's either going to be obviously Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter.
All right, so let's move on from pick number 1 to pick number 2, because the Titans have now made their decision. The Browns are on the clock, and Mel, again, we can make a decision about them potentially going down the quarterback tunnel. That being said, with the second pick in my mock 3.0, the Cleveland Browns are taking Abdul Carter, the edge rusher from Penn State. And let me just again explain my analysis and my thoughts behind this pick here. A lot of people have said, all right, the Browns, like the Titans, might need to take a quarterback this year, right? Deshaun Watson is probably going to miss the entirety of next season. On top of that, he's no longer a good quarterback. On top of that, it's the worst contract maybe in the history of the NFL, maybe even all sports. It's awful, no matter what way you view this quarterback situation in Cleveland. Here is the reason why I did not go with a quarterback here, Mel, is I feel there is a 2-man tier at the top of the board where these players are so good and offer so much upside at their respective jobs. In the case of Travis Hunter, it's 2 jobs. In the case of Abdul Carter, you could also say it's 2 jobs because he was an inside linebacker who kicked down to an edge rusher for Penn State. That they're so good at those 2 jobs that you can make the credible case to bypass a quarterback, which, as we know, if a quarterback hits, it's way more valuable than any other position in all the sports. But these guys are so gifted that they had to go 1-2 in some order. In this mock draft, for me, if the Browns do end up changing their stance and trading Myles Garrett, there's no perfect replacement for Myles Garrett. He might be the best defensive player on the planet, but is in this draft class, there's no question the best pass rusher is Abdul Carter. To me, I made it a layup call. The Browns go Abdul Carter at 2. Any objection to this pick after Hunter at 1?
Not at all, Phil. This is a situation where you have some pieces in place. Keep in mind, for as bad as the Browns appear right now, they beat the Ravens and the Steelers miraculously, right? Beat the Ravens and the Steelers. So you'll get the Cleveland Browns say, okay, take quarterback. Well, if you love the two, we know there are two elite players in this draft. That'd be Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. Quarterbacks aren't, even for me, that high, as highly rated as those guys, and they're not even close to what the guys were last year. How about the whole LaDainian? Remember LaDainian Tomlinson went to the Chargers and they got Drew Brees in the second round? Okay, so maybe you go Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, whoever is left over that Tennessee doesn't take, right? Because you need both those guys. So you take the one that's left. Second round, you had Jackson Dart going to Steelers. I hated that pick. Okay, I hated the Steelers taking Jackson Dart there, but I like Jackson Dart as QB3. Jackson Dart's their early second round for Cleveland. You got to think about whether you like Jalen Milroe, Will Howard, whether you like Kyle McCord, Tyler Shock. There's going to be other quarterbacks that are going to you have to figure out between now and late April that will be in line to be an early, mid, late second round pick, third round pick, right? Yep. So the Browns could go that route. Yeah, remember, Dak Prescott was a fourth-round pick. Kirk Cousins was a fourth-round pick. Once in a while, you catch lightning in a bottle in the fourth round. Maybe one of these quarterbacks drops the round 4. So you go that route. The quarterback room is going to be completely different next year in Cleveland. We know that, but it doesn't have to be with the second pick. So I'm with you, Field. Yeah. Go get the Hunter, Carter, whoever's left, and then worry about quarterback in the second, third, fourth round, or go out and get somebody in free agency.
All right. So, by the way, we are going to discuss that Jackson Dart pick, which was a great selection on Monday's show. Mel and I will be at each other's throats on that because really, I thought it was one of my favorite picks in the entire 32 selection proceedings. We'll have to dive into that on the next shows. We are still going to focus in on the top 10 here today. Pretty good on the first two so far here, Mel. With the third pick, the New York Giants, who need a quarterback. Take Cam Ward, quarterback out of the University of Miami. And so let me explain, because people have been asking me since the mock drop. All right, so if you're going to take Cam Ward third, why wouldn't you just take him first or second overall? I just said how I have a two-man tier at the very top of the board. On top of that, the difference between the Giants and definitely the Titans, and I would argue the Browns, is that the Giants don't have a choice. They need a quarterback this year, or else Joe Shane and Brian Daboll are gone, right? Because they're not going to get any better. I have used this rule in the past, and I will continue to use it every time a situation like this comes up. If the owner announces at the end of the season that the head coach and the GM are keeping their job for another year, it means the head coach and the GM remain on the hot seat, right? If they go 3-14 again next year, bye-bye. Somebody else is going to be the head coach and the GM of the New York Giants. And if they don't have a quarterback in place, it might be 3-14 once again, regardless of how brilliant Malik Neighbors is. So I go Cam Ward here. Is it a little bit of a forcing up the board? Yes, a little bit. But given the circumstances, Mel, I actually felt really good about Cam Ward to the New York Giants, unless, of course, they make a move during free agency to get a veteran. What do you think?
It's a rough position to be in if you're Joe Shane and Brian Daboll. It's really a tough spot because we're saying, even me, who always gives the benefit of doubt with the positional value to the quarterbacks, because you see some things you really like. I've been 4 and 5. You got them down further than that. Matt Miller, Jordan Reed have them further down. So at the end of the day, we're not loving these quarterbacks like we did last year, but we're asking these quarterbacks to be the guy that's going to keep the job of the GM and the head coach in place. Right? Maintain those positions for Joe Shane and Brian Daboll by playing really well as a rookie. And that's asking an awful lot, right? And to me, they had a heck of a draft last year, no doubt about it, but they made some moves that obviously in free agency. Defensive player, running back, didn't work out too good letting guys go. But when you look at the Giants, yes, Cam Ward makes sense with the mobility, the legs, the athleticism, okay? That Brian Daboll has had, but he's also had pocket passers, so can't lock in. I remember I bought Baltimore with Joe Flacco, then to Lamar Jackson. Brian Daboll's been around more quarterbacks than just Josh Allen in his career. Totally. So at the end of the day, if they want to go Cam Ward, fine. But what you just said, Field, tells you that probably there'll be some changes, because if Brian Daboll and Joe Shane need Cam Ward, what you're saying, they need Cam Ward to play at a Jaden Daniels, right, level, Bo Nix level. Because if they play maybe at a Caleb Williams level, who was, I thought, pretty good, really good, and great in some games, but they didn't win a lot of games. There's some early. Was that enough? So Caleb Williams maybe maintains them, but if they fall way back and they play at the level of the New England Patriots played, even though Drake May was there, what you're saying is the changes are made. So this is going to be really interesting if they put all this pressure on Cam Ward to be the guy that's going to keep maintaining the jobs of the GM and the head coach. It's going to be really interesting. But I'm with you. I get it with the mobility of Ward over Shedeur Sanders. So, yes, if he's there, I would have to think Cam Ward's the pick with the New York Giants.
All right, so I finally got one. That's 2 in a row, actually, that you pretty much agree with. I'll take it. I don't know how I got a C+ from this mock draft, but we'll have to find out what you don't like going forward here. And let's move.
Well, hey, Phil, one big blunder could drop you severely down the line.
That's what I'm finding out.
One major mistake, major gaffe, major hiccup is something that could really reduce that grade. We'll get that in a minute. New England, what do you got going with the Pats?
All right, so the Patriots at number 4, Mel, have one, to me, honestly, like one of the more interesting decisions in this year's draft. The Patriots at pick 4 have an obvious need at left tackle, right? And you and I both fundamentally believe you got to throw every resource available behind your young quarterback when you have resources to throw. The Patriots have one, the 4th overall pick. This is a very, very valuable selection that, by the way, could have been number 1 overall if they had just lost in week 18. I get it. Some people think it's a loser's mentality. I think I'd rather have pick 1 and the opportunity to trade down and get more picks. That's a different conversation for a different show. But at pick number 4 here, Mel, you could also make the case that it's not like the Patriots are exactly stacked on defense. And my personal board has Mason Graham as the 3rd best player in the entire draft. I think that's close to, if not in line with where you have him as well. 3rd overall. And I mentioned now it's a 2-man tier at the top. Mason Graham ain't that far behind. Would they feel the need for the Patriots? Yeah. Did they just hire a defensive-minded head coach in Mike Vrabel, who, by the way, in Tennessee won a lot of games with guys like Jarrell Casey and then Jeffrey Simmons as their best defensive player? Sure did. And yet I ended up going with Will Campbell from LSU, Mel, because I just don't want to see the Patriots, years, not even 5 years, after giving Mac Jones very little in the way of support, go down the same path. So I took Will Campbell from LSU, a guy who started 3 seasons for the Tigers, day 1 starter, young kid, tremendous feet, Mel, and just a tremendous mentality as well. He's talked about this, and I love the quote from Will Campbell, talking about the importance of understanding, like, when you get beat, like, that stuff happens, Mel. It's the NFL. Not yet for Will, but he will be getting beat in the NFL. The best offensive tackles, though, what they do is they get back on the next play and they say, I'm going to win, right? It's like a strikeout in baseball. The strikeout leads to a home run on the very next at bat. So the mental toughness of Will Campbell doesn't have ideal arm length. I think he can stand to put on a little bit more weight, but he carries that very well with that footwork. Give me Will Campbell, pick number 4. What do you think?
Yeah, and when you have Drake May, you're right. You got to force, and there's not a lot of separation. And people say, well, you got him 11 on the board. How can you take him at 4? The grade between the 5th player and the 11th player, 12th players in this draft isn't much. It's right there. You're splitting hairs. So it's not like there's this big drop off between 5 and 11, 6 and 11. It's not. So to say Will Campbell could go at 4 is not a stretch at all. And especially with Kelvin Banks Jr. falling back just a bit, okay? Yep. And Josh Simmons having the injury from Ohio State. T-Mac, when you want a wide receiver, T-Mac's a guy that's going to be in the discussion, but it's probably a little too high for Tetairoa McMillan from Arizona to go this high. Mykel Williams makes sense, but a little high for a guy who didn't have the domination in terms of production off the edge that you would want, even though he had the ankle injury he was coming off of. So I get it. Will Campbell makes sense. Young quarterback, left tackle. If he doesn't get it done, and the arm length is going to be important because when we get to the combine, that arm length will be critical because you have to be within a certain range. Let's see if he is. If not, then obviously you look at a guard. You're not going to draft a guard at number 4. You're drafting Will Campbell to be the left tackle with the New England Patriots. Make no mistake about that. So if they feel he can be that left tackle, that guy for 10, 12 years and be there with Drake May the entire way when you're getting to 2, 3, 4 Super Bowls or AFC championship games because Drake May becomes what Tom Brady was, you got to have that left tackle. So I'm with you on Will Campbell. I would have no problem. I do think there'll be other guys in the discussion who I already mentioned, but at the end of the day, after I say, if you're not going to take Mason Graham, who is the highest rated player, and they could use a defensive tackle like Mason Graham, that is a need. So unless Vrabel goes away from that and says, hey, I got to get the left tackle, we love Will Campbell's attitude, approach, highly rated out of high school, heck of a career, Jaden Daniels, Nussmeier didn't matter. He's protecting those guys. Will Campbell at 4, I'm not going to have any issue with.
All right, yeah, so that's a good debate, though. I do think just because do you take the best player available or the most important spot? My thoughts going into the combine, Mel, because you're right, that arm length will get talked about a lot, is I'd rather try Will Campbell at left tackle and see him fail than draft him and say we're putting him at guard right away. There's just too much value in left tackle. We know that. Just check the salaries between the top paid left tackles and the top paid guards. You see the discrepancy. You see why teams need those left tackles. All right, so let's move forward here to pick number 5. And the Jacksonville Jaguars, with their new head coach, Liam Cohen, who can now properly say, not Duval, but Duval, takes a defensive player, because, man, it was an atrocious year defensively. And Mason Graham has to wait a whole 10 more minutes to get drafted, Mel, as the Jaguars take the Michigan defensive tackle. I could give you a bunch of explanations here, Mel. They were an awful defense last year, terrible in pretty much every which way. He's the best player on my board regardless of position, who also happens to fill a major need for them. This, to me, would be a pretty easy one for whoever is the GM.
Yeah, this is a curveball in the top group, in that top four. Mason Graham. So New England decided to take Mason Graham because he's the best player on the board and they need a defensive tackle. Then the left tackle spot, you could upgrade there. It's okay, but you could get an upgrade if you feel Campbell's better than the guy you have there in Little. But to me, yes, the way it falls based on the quarterback getting forced to the Giants, the two elite defensive players gone. So you know a quarterback's going to go. You know the two stars of this draft, which are, in no particular order, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter. Yep. And then you get into whether Will Campbell fills that need, and they have to take him based on arm length. That's fine, everything. Unless there's a curveball at 4, then Mason Graham's there at 5, and I don't think you can pass them out. Their interior was awful. Now, yes, they have some young players. We'll see what Mason Smith can develop into. Yep. But at the end of the day, this is a given, Field. This is a given. And if you get somebody else emerges, great, because this is a given. You know what you're getting with Mason Graham. You're getting a disruptor who gives you everything he has, play in and play out. Now, he's the kind of guy that you can be guaranteed will be a stud in this league. And if one of those other guys, those young guys, develops, great. Great, because Walker's emerging, okay, as a pass rusher, can get double-digit sacks in the NFL, former number 1 pick overall, had some struggles early on, seems to be getting it. So now you get the interior presence to go along with Walker, then you're off to the races.
All right, so we've gotten through half of the top 10, having a fun time here. Again, Mason Graham, I almost feel bad making him last all the way to 5 here, Mel, because he is such a tremendous prospect. This guy is, I think, really a zero weakness player. Maybe he's just a touch below ideal length, but really a great, great force. All right, so we go to number 6 here, Mel, and things continue to be interesting, and we move from what I think is, I think I at least personally felt with number 5, like that was kind of an easy one. Things get, I guess, a little bit more complicated once we get past the 5th pick in the draft. Or not, because we have the Las Vegas Raiders on the clock here, Mel. We've been talking about this one since really the beginning of the process here. The Raiders need a quarterback in a major, major way. In this circumstance, they would not just get one, but they would get one without having to move at all in the order. As with the 6th pick in the 2025 Mock 3.0, the Raiders land Shedeur Sanders, Colorado quarterback. And we all know the relationship between Shedeur Sanders and Tom Brady. There's great reference there. We know that Tom Brady will be heavily involved in the process throughout the offseason, along with their new GM, John Spytek, a great evaluator, and their head coach, Pete Carroll, a great winner. So, Mel, I could, again, wax poetic about what Shedeur Sanders does well here, but for a team that needs a quarterback, I think most people are familiar enough with Shedeur's game to give you this information that he would be a logical pick here at number 6. What do you think?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I think this is the most interesting pick of the top 10 because of this. Last year, they wanted Mykel Penix Jr. That seemed, although everybody thought Mykel Penix Jr. was the guy they wanted. They stood pat. They didn't get him, but they had to settle for one Brock Bowers, who was the 6th highest rated player on my board. He drops down to 13. They take Brock Bowers, and he had a phenomenal year. He's a great player. He's going to have probably a Hall of Fame career. I think Brock Bowers can be a Hall of Fame caliber player. So you get that guy because you didn't get the quarterback. So that's a pretty good guy to settle for as a future Hall of Famer in Brock Bowers. Yep. Then you say, okay, this year, we could take Shedeur Sanders, but we could also go get Sam Darnold maybe. Adam Schefter's talked about that as an option, right?
Yep.
So if you get Sam, who's still young, by the way, okay, came in the same year Josh Allen did. Young quarterback who really emerged again this year with Minnesota, even though he had those 2 bad games at the end. You go with Sam, okay, and then you draft, whether it's T-Mac, Tetairoa McMillan. How about Ashton Genty here? They could use a running back. So you could get your quarterback, pair him with Ashton Genty, okay? Running backs, for me, I wouldn't take a running back, but hey, that's a neat area. Genty's worthy of being this high a pick. So that's if you go get Sam. If you don't get Sam and you say, okay, we're taking Shedeur, you take Shedeur. The Tom Brady connection, everything about Shedeur I like. I understand he's not the great athlete that some of these other guys were. He doesn't have the howitzer for an arm, but he is a guy who will surgically go after an attack and destroy a defense. And I love his mindset. I love everything about Shedeur. I've been a Shedeur guy from day one. Before he even got to Colorado, when he was at Jackson State, I love Shedeur Sanders. So I would take Shedeur here. I understand that they went after Sam because that allows you to use that pick Hey, not getting a quarterback last year didn't destroy them because they end up with Brock. Now you get Sam and you get Genty. So you got the great receiver, you got the great running back. You could do that. So I want to see how they attack it. You got new head coach, GM, all that. How do they attack this quarterback situation in a division with Mahomes and Herbert and Nix? Now, all of a sudden, you were third, maybe fourth. You didn't know who was going to be third because you didn't know what Nix is going to be great, right? So now you're the fourth in the division. Field, you can't be that way. They got to figure out quarterback, either taking Shedeur or going for a Sam Darnold or somebody else to bring in, and which would allow them and free them up at that pick to take somebody else.
All right, two thoughts here, Mel. One, yesterday on ESPN Bet Live, they asked me what the range was for Ashton Genty, the fourth highest rated player on my board. And I said the earliest I could see him going was the Vegas Raiders. The latest would be about where he goes in my mock draft. We'll discuss that on Monday's show. Mm-hmm. I love the player, Mel. Love the player. Pete Carroll, of course, loves to run the football. Running backs are having a moment. I would be so disappointed if they took Ashton Genty. Not because he isn't a great player. Not because he wouldn't help them right away. I think he would be the early favorite to be the NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year. When was the last time we felt good about the Raiders quarterback situation? Great about the Raiders quarterback situation, right? This team needs to be looking for answers at the spots that are hardest to find them. They had a great running back in Josh Jacobs. The guy led the NFL in rushing yards a couple of years ago. How did they do? Not great, right? I want this team to value the premium positions that have proven to be not just the ones that influence winning the most, but also the ones that prove to be the hardest to replace, right? That is what I am looking for from the Las Vegas Raiders this season, this specific draft. Let's move to pick number 7 here, Mel. And I really think this is about where things, for me, got most interesting. So the Jets have the pick. As of the time that you and I are having this conversation, they have not yet formally moved on from Aaron Rodgers, but it's going to happen. So quarterback is now a need for the Jets. Wasn't going to put a quarterback at pick number 7 overall here, Mel. So with the 7th pick in the 2025 Mock 3.0, I go with Mykel Williams, pass rusher from Georgia. And let's think about the Jets edge group right now as things presently stand. They had a breakout year from Will McDonald, a guy that you loved in the draft process a few years ago. He was excellent this past season. Jermaine Johnson was looking great before he tore his Achilles, but he is recovering from a torn Achilles. It seems like the rehab and the progress is going well, but it's something to be mindful of. I think about where they are as a franchise now. New head coach and new GM. Defensive-minded head coach at that. This team needs to just worry about value here. I'm not as concerned about whether the team's biggest need at number 7 is pass rusher or offensive tackle. I know there are people that say, wait, but the offensive line is a big need, especially on that right side at right tackle. Would you find a tackle for them? Maybe, but they're early enough on in the process. And didn't Aaron Glenn just learn, unfortunately, the very hard way, how difficult it is to not just build a great defense, but to stay healthy on that great defense? The Lions had more injuries than anybody this past season. So I get it. If they have Jermaine Johnson healthy, and if Will McDonald turns 2024 and then 2025 into back-to-back great seasons, maybe it's not their biggest need. I will never fault a team for padding their defensive line and specifically their pass rushing depth. So I go with Mykel Williams.
Yeah, I got to figure quarterback field at some point. You're in a division with Josh, Drake May, Tua, and the AFC loaded with great quarterbacks, and you're fourth. Again, that's the problem. You're fourth. You're by miles. You don't have a quarterback. Okay, miles and miles and miles, right? You're across the other side of the country. You're so far away from what the reality is a quarterback that you need to be. It's not, so you got to get a quarterback. Who's it going to be? Shedeur Sanders, he's dropping to the Raiders. What would preclude the Jets from going up ahead of the Raiders and getting a guy like Shedeur Sanders? Sure. That's going to be interesting. Are the Raiders going to lose out on Shedeur? Now, if they don't get Darnold, what do they do then? So if they get Darnold, it's a moot point. Then if they get Darnold, Shedeur could be there, Field, for the Jets. So do you take Shedeur Sanders? If you're the Jets, I would think you would, right? So then you say, okay, you mentioned a pass rusher. When are we going to get the surprise, not a shocker, but when are we going to get a surprise? Would Mike Green be a surprise here? Coming out of Marshall.
Man, hold on. This is good. I'm glad you brought this up. When I had my mock draft back in December, that was the second mock that I did, the first mock that I count as like maybe the most credible in the cycle, because the August one I consider, from your guidance, more just like, here are the players we're going to be watching most closely during the upcoming season. A lot of football left. The day after, the show after my first mock draft, I asked Joe if we could do what is my biggest regret a day after the mock went live? And I said, my biggest regret was I wish I had Mike Green in the first half of the first round. I had him, I think, like 26th or something. I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was low in the first round, lower. And you and I talked about this, and you said, I agree with you, young Fieldy. That's a good point for once from you. Mm-hmm. Mike Green might go in the first 15 picks. Well, we'll talk about where he lands on Monday for my mock draft. But I still might have been too low based off where I had him. Mel, we were talking about arm length earlier. 32.25 arm lengths for Mike Green at the Senior Bowl. There are certain players, and we'll talk about another one in just a moment, where sometimes you have to ignore the measurables because the player is just too good of a football player. So, I think if you and I are talking about Mike Green as a top 10 prospect over the next 2 months, wouldn't stun me. I mean, 17 sacks kind of speaks for itself, Mel. The guy was a terrific pass rusher at Marshall. I mean, I'm not sure anybody, and there are a couple other guys that come to mind, Armand Membu and Shamar Stewart and a few others, but not too many players boosted their draft stock as much as Mike Green did this past year. Yeah,
you hit it. The Shamar Stewart. Shamar Stewart, even though he had 1.5 sacks the last 2 years at Texas A&M, is so talented. And like he said when he was interviewed down there, he said, hey, I'm number one pick in this draft. Yeah. So again, Shamar Stewart, Mike Green, Princely McMillan, all these different guys. Somebody's going to be a surprise up that high. And I don't know who it's going to be. Jalon Walker, we haven't mentioned. Jalon Walker can play edge, off ball. You can move him around at Georgia. So while Mykel Williams is the edge guy who's an LT-peer, he looks the part. Jalon Walker produced. Jalon Walker did it inside. He did it outside. He did it everywhere. That number 11 was flying. He was popping field. So Jalon Walker, I think, would make a lot of sense here for the Jets as well, as with Williams, but certainly quarterback in the mix. Whether, where are we're going to get McMillan, we're going to get a Green, we're going to get a surprise there. The Jets and the Raiders, because they're back-to-back, and the quarterback position is key. Darnold's not going back to the Jets, but he could be a Raider. All this is going to be really fun to see how it plays out with the Raiders pick and the Jets pick being back-to-back, and maybe some movement and what's going to happen there. And the divisions, we talk about what the Raiders got to do a quarterback because of the division, what the Jets have to do a quarterback because of the division. Wow, that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so all right, so a couple of potential curveballs there, but you mentioned Jalon Walker, which is a nice segue by you, TV/podcast professional Mel Kiper Jr., as with the 8th pick in the 2025 Mock 3.0, the Carolina Panthers are on the clock, and they take Jalon Walker from Georgia. And I was just talking about how with Mike Green, I don't care about the arms. Lots of evidence of guys over the years, Terrell Suggs, Dwight Freeney, those guys have gone on to become Hall of Fame players with short arms by NFL standards. Sometimes you just have to ignore it when the player is that good. Jalon Walker, same deal here, Mel. I don't care if he's 6'0", which would be 6'1" and 3/4 of an inch. This guy has the goods. You think about, this is a weird way to describe it maybe to some people, Mel, but when I go back and watch Georgia from this past year, and let's call it what it is, they're going to have Mykel Williams and Jalon Walker, probably Malachi Starks in the first round. Smile Munden will get drafted. Nas Stockhouse will get drafted. Dan Jackson will get drafted, right? They're going to have 6, 7 guys, maybe 8 guys from that defense get drafted this year, right? Who did you feel the most game in and game out? And it wasn't close. I mean, it wasn't close. Jalon Walker popped more than anybody else on this defense by a country mile. Became a full-time player this past year, but he led the team in sacks 2 seasons ago as an inside linebacker and an edge rusher. He did it all for Georgia. I know there are going to be some that are going to dissect Jalon Walker a little bit. He's 5th overall on the Yates big board here, Mel. Love the player. He'd be great for Carolina, who has nothing in the way of pass rush that they can bank on beyond 2025.
I'm with you. I think they're going to end up with one of those guys who it's going to be. And I keep throwing Shamar Stewart's name in there because, again, he was disruptive. He is a guy. You talk about an LT peer with Mykel Williams. There's another LT peer in Shamar Stewart. Boy, he looks like he can be spectacular. And we can say, well, the production wasn't there. Like I said, I always bring up Owe in Baltimore. Didn't have a sack. He's got sacks with the Ravens. So, again, it's going to be really fun to see which of those pass rushers the Carolina Panthers end up with.
All right, so the Panthers have the 8th overall pick. Let's stay in the division is with the 9th overall pick. The now Kellen Moore-led New Orleans Saints are on the clock here, Mel. And with the 9th pick in the draft, the Mock 3.0, presented to you by Yates and Company. The New Orleans Saints take Tetairoa McMillan, the wide receiver from Arizona. All right, let me explain myself, and this one might take a little bit more than every other pick up to this point for this reason. Mel, this is going to be a combination of addressing needs for the Saints and also recognizing where my board is at, and finally commenting on what I think is important for New Orleans to do right now. The Saints are, as everybody who follows the NFL closely knows, in a very precarious salary cap spot. This is a team that has pushed money forward and forward and forward. Other teams do that. Philadelphia does it. Worked pretty well for them, right? They're the Super Bowl champions. The Saints are picking 9th overall. It's time for New Orleans to at some point decide, do we want to reset and eventually find a way back to building a sustained product, or do we want to just keep pushing things forward and go for more mediocrity? It's time for them to do the former, except that it's a time to reset. You've got a 36-year-old, the youngest head coach in all of the NFL now. Let him grow into a head coach for 5 years. Let this be a rebuild. I understand that sucks for fans, Mel, but it's the right thing for them to get back to their winning ways and go to Super Bowls, not just host them like they did a great job of doing this past week. Tetairoa McMillan is a player that I think deserves to go in the first 10 or 12 selections. He would help New Orleans at a position that by the end of the season was a glaring need. Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed missed extensive time last year due to a concussion and also a knee injury for Shaheed. So I think it's enough of a need, enough of a value, and it's a position where the NFL values it tremendously that you take a young T-Mac, 6'5", 210-pound wide receiver, and let him be a fixture for the next decade in your offense.
Yeah, the word polarizing is going to come up with a lot of players as we get into this portion of the draft field.
Agreed.
And he's one of those guys. We were with Matt Miller yesterday. Matt said it's a major reach. He wouldn't do it. I don't think it's a reach. He does. Yeah, the bottom line is you're going to get a lot of that now because there's going to be mixed opinions. And polarizing means, hey, some guys think he can be really good. Even Matt said, hey, I see a little Drake London in him. Matt's Mr. Comp. Matt's going to comp everybody to a player. And Matt throws a reach, but Drake London went pretty high. And Drake London's a guy physically, Tetairoa McMillan kind of looks that part. You throw it up. You think he's covered. He'll go get it. I think when you look at Will Johnson, another polarizing player field, cornerback out of Michigan. Yep. Will Johnson, we talk about arm length for Will Campbell. The Wills, arm length for Will Campbell, speed for Will Johnson. What's that 40 time going to be? If he runs 4.45, I think he goes pretty high.
Agreed.
You think about this would be a good spot for him. If he runs 4.53, he's going to drop a little bit. So that the difference in 40 time for Will Johnson is going to be critical. And I think if he runs well, he deserves to be up here in this spot. And I think that could be a possibility. And McMillan would drop a little further down. But if he's there, and you still have a receiver need. There's no question you have that need at wide receiver. So I would have no issue at all with Tetairoa McMillan going here to the Saints.
We were talking about that Will Johnson thing months ago, Will. I mean, Greeny almost lost it. Remember, Greeny was like, what do you mean Will Johnson might drop out of the top 10? I said, Greeny, this is what scouts are debating right now, is what's the history in if he ran a 4.52? What's the history in a 4.52 cornerback or wide receiver for that matter going in the top 10? If there is examples of it, there aren't many, at least not recently. So something to keep in mind. I know some people think we agonize over the wrong things. We're doing our best, though, to give you the most accurate reflection of how we think the draft will shake out.
And real quick, Phil, I'll give you an example from last year. I love TJ Tampa, right?
Yeah. Yep.
TJ Tampa dropped to the 4th round because he ran with 4.52, 4.54 in that area. Yeah. He didn't have the 4.45 40. So heck of a player. Now the question is, and they know they got a good player in TJ Tampa, by the way. They stole him in the 4th round. Internally, they really like this guy. He's going to be a factor with slot corner. Could even be a safety, could even be an outside corner. He's going to have to define what his role is because we know he can tackle. We know he's got great ball skills and instincts. TJ Tampa is going to be a really good pick, and he was a 4th round steal. But the reason they dropped instead of being a 2nd round pick into the 4th round is because of that 40 time. So if you don't think it's important, look at TJ Tampa. If you don't think it's important, keep an eye on Will Johnson because that is going to be a major factor in whether he's in line to be the 5th, 6th, 7th pick or he drops in, as you said, field in that 15 range.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Again, we're just trying to set the table in case these guys slide a little bit after the combine. If they do run, which we'll see, as we know, some of these guys are going to say, why bother running and if it can only hurt me and not help me? All right, so with the final pick, the 10th pick in the 2025 Mock 3.0, Chicago Bears with GM Ryan Poles and his new head coach, Ben Johnson, very excited about what the offense will look like there. Take Kelvin Banks Jr., offensive tackle from Texas. And Mel, this is a guy that we've been talking about since the beginning of the season. One of my favorite prospects coming into the year. Admittedly, it wasn't the best year for Kelvin Banks compared to where it was in prior years. And yet, Mel, we can do this with a lot of great prospects at the top of the board. And one thing that I keep coming back to is this. Is the guy a pretty darn good player in every category? I would argue yes. This is a big guy. Maybe lacks ideal length, once again, like Will Campbell. He's got good feet, good athlete, held up extremely well in pass protection, had one of, if not the lowest pressure percentage allowed in all of FBS amongst offensive tackles. 3-year starter for Texas, protecting for Quinn Ewers, playing in a ton of big games against a lot of big-time competition. Is he perfect? No, but for the Bears, who are so desperate for offensive line help, Mel, you could do worse than Kelvin Banks Jr. You buying it? You selling it?
Yeah, I'll get to that. So I know we have a question from one of our viewers, listeners, Field. I think it relates to the Chicago Bears. So if you have that question, you can pop up.
All right, here we go.
I think we can delve into and give you an answer to that question.
Look at this. This question is from Ashwin3. Really nice work, Field. Wow, Ashwin, thank you for being the only person to say something nice on the internet yesterday. Usually it's reserved for people who hate you. I'm seeing a lot of mocks that have the Bears drafting offensive tackles, specifically Banks at number 10, and I'm so befuddled because I feel like there's a more desperate need at the interior offensive line, and Tyler Booker feels like the ideal choice. At least Ashwin feels that Braxton Jones is a more than serviceable left tackle. All right, that's actually not... That's not unkind. I mean, that's a very kind thing to say and a logical and coherent piece of feedback there. Here's one spot we can cross off for the Bears. One is we're crossing off right tackle, right? They've got Darnell Wright. They're going to feel good about that position now and going forward. What do you think about that one, Mel? Do you think that they should be considering interior offensive line over tackle instead?
I think it's a great question because they have picks at 39 and 41 in the second round, right? Yeah. So you have multiple early second round picks. You have a pick in the third round at 72. So that's 4 inside 72, 3 inside 41. So if you go at 10 and you say, okay, we can maybe, take a Josh Simmons and we can wait it out because he's the best left tackle, right? Or we take a Kelvin Banks Jr. who can play left tackle, could play guard. We know we got 4 spots that we got to get better at. Right tackle, Darnell Wright, and then 4 spots they have to improve for Caleb Williams. Where'd Ben Johnson come from, Fielding? He came from Detroit Lions.
Yep.
Who had arguably the best offensive line along with the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFL. Yep. So you think about this offensive line with Penei Sewell and company. They may need another piece now, but has had a heck of an offensive line run the Detroit Lions have with Ben Johnson, which allowed Jared Goff and Gibbs and all those guys to do their damage, and Amon St. Brown, everybody to do their thing, right?
Yep.
He's going to attack this line. Attack it early. Okay. Remember the late great Bill Walsh when he needed defensive backs? He got Ronnie Lott. He got Carlton Williamson. He got Eric Wright. He got Lynn Thomas. He went for 4 defensive backs in one draft. Okay. Why not go heavy O-line? Caleb Williams is the guy. He showed he could be great. You got Rome coming into year 2, Rome Odunze. You got pieces. Okay. Why not go offensive tackle, whether it's Simmons, Banks here, and then look at the guard. I mentioned Tyler Booker. Well, you can get a guard. How about Marcus Bowe? Okay. Yeah. Play guard at Purdue, can play center, can play Marcus Bowe. How about Gray Zabel? Can play anywhere. Center, both guard spots. Gray Zabel, second round, early second round. Marcus Bowe, Anthony Belton, Emory Jones. There's a lot of guys. Hey, Arizona, it's got a kid, right?
Yep.
That you like?
Jonah Savaiinaea. Yep.
Savaiinaea. Yep. Another guy in that mixed field. So for me, in the second round, you get the guard center option. You take the tackle in the first, and then you're building for Caleb Williams like the Lions had for Ben Johnson. He would have that with the Bears. So I think you're right. No question. The offensive line's got to be the point of emphasis here, and multiple picks have to go to address that position.
I agree there. One thing I will say on Braxton Jones, and again, by the way, Ashman, thank you. Like I'm being funny when I say that it was the only nice thing that someone said, but Mel, truthfully, like I do really value fan feedback when it's stuff like, hey, like, just as a fan, here are the things that I think are big weaknesses for us. What are your thoughts? As opposed to things like, this is the worst mock draft of all time. You're entitled to your opinion. It's just not particularly constructive feedback when that's what you have to say. Braxton Jones, though, worth noting, injury at the end of the season. So he'll be rehabbing this offseason. Regardless of whether it's guard, tackle, I think we can all agree offensive line investments figure to happen for the Chicago Bears. The last thing that I want to say on this mock draft, and I probably should have tucked this in when we were talking about the Giants and the Raiders taking quarterbacks, Mel, is that it's February 13th when this mock is dropping. Happy Valentine's Day, by the way, to everybody out there. Get your wife some flowers. Free agency is about to take place, or I guess 4 weeks away from right now, Mel. More so than last year, where it was going to be the guys early, right? Like March is going to influence this draft a whole lot more than the early picks last year. I mean, the first 5 picks last year were not at all influenced by March, really, when you think about it. I mean, the 3 quarterbacks, Marvin Harrison Jr. and then Joe Alt. So we're going to see some shaking up based off what takes place in the 4 weeks ahead of us, maybe 4, 5, 6 weeks ahead of us as we get through the various waves of free agency. So keep that in mind. I'm not trying to say, I'm not trying to fence it or take myself off the hook for mock draft picks that might look ridiculous 6 weeks from right now. Just to note that a lot of stuff can certainly change. That is going to do it for us here on First Draft today. But we are back next week, Mel. A double dip, as always, Monday and Thursday. We will continue to look at my mock draft on Monday. Until then, what the heck are we going to do this weekend, Mel? What do you have planned? There's no football.
Oh, I got some calls to make. I got a mock coming out, mock 2.0 coming out soon, Fielding. So I have a lot of calls to make to my friends in the National Football League, pal. So that's what I'll be doing on the phone, occupied, trying to get some intel that will help me with my mock 2.0, where I may or may not project a trade or two.
If you're trying to figure out how he becomes the very best, the man who is the business, that's your answer. It'll be February 16th, and he'll be on the phone all day making calls to make sure Mock 2.0 looks really good. For Mel, I am Field. We'll talk to you guys again on Monday. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast or check us out every time on the NFL and ESPN YouTube channel.